Welcome to Unlocking Human Potential with me, Andy Hosgood, a show dedicated to exploring what it really takes psychologically, behaviourally and practically to help humans thrive through conversations with leaders, founders, coaches, behavioural experts and people shaping how humans perform and grow. Is this for you? But if you're a leader, a founder, a business owner or an ambitious professional who wants to do more than just perform, they want to grow, inspire and bring the best out in themselves and their people, then keep listening, because the mission is simple: to explore how individuals and teams unlock potential in themselves, in others and the organisations they shape. Every episode is a deep but relaxed conversation built around three core questions. How do you optimise yourself? How do you unlock potential in others? And the best advice for you, the listener. Now over to the episode. Really hope you find it helpful and insightful. Just before we introduce our next guest, please make sure you press the follow button to keep updated with the latest episodes. Additionally, special thanks to 246 Photography and Pixel Made Brands for making this podcast a reality. Now over to the episode. Matty, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me on board, Andy.
All the way from Melbourne, which I believe is the original capital of Australia.
Well, some may have us believe so, but it's a point of conjecture.
So for our listeners, Matty Lloyd is a former professional cyclist whose career reached the highest level of world sport. An Olympian, Australian national road champion, and winner of both the stage at the King of the Mountains classification at the Giro d'Italia. He experienced the extraordinary heights that few athletes ever reach. But his most significant education came after sport. In 2014, Matthew suffered a catastrophic hit-and-run accident in the United States that left him with a traumatic brain injury and multiple life-threatening injuries. What followed was a decade-long battle with addiction, identity loss, and the painstaking process of rebuilding a life from the ground up. Matty, welcome to Unlocking Human Potential. We connected because I did a podcast with Susie Kindred. We put it on Instagram. You'd commented on the post, and for confession of most people, I'm a bit of an Instagram stalker. When people comment, I'm going, right, who's this guy? So I looked at your profile, I looked at things you'd done, and I reached straight out saying, I'd love to have a conversation. And I'll be honest, I didn't know where the conversation was going to really go when we first met. It really impacted me. In fact, I think I've been telling your story, knowing that we had this booked in. I think I've been telling your story for the last 2 weeks since we got it in. Because I think there's going to be a lot of stuff that listeners can take away from your story, your journey, and obviously a lot of the lessons that you've learned along the way. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Yeah, thanks so much, Andy. It's one of those things with, whether it be Instagram or generally the internet these days, if we're to investigate the things that just take our interest, often enough through that we can find the things that really draw us in. So whether it's happenstance or just the way things work, I'm really fortunate to have got in contact with you, and really looking forward to our discussion.
Brilliant. So one of the things that kind of underpins the podcast, and I would probably say the majority of guests, and certainly my kind of outlook in life, is curiosity. So we always ask guests, what's something that you're curious about right now?
Yeah, I suppose one of the things that I'm continually drawn to, or provides the most curiosity for me, is people's capacity um, to recognize their own potential, which sounds quite broad and, you know, I suppose open ended. But that's the beauty of it, because
Mm-hmm.
we're in a time, particularly right now, where we don't actually know where the global trajectory is going. Um, but for me, that draws into um, our own personal potentials. Um, and if we're to really lock in and focus on those, optimistically, of course, we'll be heading in the right trajectory um, in the macro sense. So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, but yeah, I suppose draws a bit of interest for me. So it's pretty cool.
I think it's really cool. It's my, I love the topic, so you know you're in good company with that. So for our first time listeners, and just to set the scene of what we're going to go through, you know, we kind of bring this into three sections. This podcast, it's around unlocking ourselves, and you know, how do we make ourselves as optimal as we can, depending on where you want to take that. You know, how do we unlock others and get the best out of others and best potential? And then I think it's always important that when people have given up, you know, an hour of their time to listen to us, that we kind of try and bring it together and, you know, the so what piece, what can people then do with parts of the conversation and the insights that we've had during this? Um, so we'll do it that and we'll bring it all together at the end with some advice. Does that sound okay for you?
Sounds awesome.
So when we talk around kind of unlocking our own potential, you know, even in your bio and the bit that I got, you know, I'll certainly allow you to go where you go with this. I certainly kind of see three avenues that where we could touch on if you feel comfortable is obviously to achieve what you achieved as an athlete is, I think, what most people would dream of, if that's fair to say, you know, and getting to the heights that you got to is a phenomenal achievement. I think to manage to deal with the catastrophe that happened to you in 2014, you know, and how you navigated that journey and that part of your or that chapter of your life. If you feel comfortable exploring that, that would be, you know, and how you kind of refound your potential or, you know, dug wherever that goes. And then obviously what you're doing now in your career and, you know, helping supporting others and you kind of retrained and stuff. Um, so I kind of leave it to you where you want to start. If you want to start from the beginning and, you know, and go that way, or if you want to dip in and out, then feel free to take it where you go.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, just looking back um, at where it all started for me during my career, I find it most interesting because I came from the sort of um, the mindset that, you know, the harder I was to push, um, the things would eventually get better. Um, and people could put that down to an athletic mindset or, you know, even a business type mindset. Um, but now I think more about reducing the distance between, you know, what you know about yourself and more of what you're consistently able to do. So in the career space, I wasn't able to differentiate. Um, between those two things. So the outcome was often enough what I really, really wanted. Mm-hmm. And whether that provided the inner satisfaction or not, I didn't know. Mm. So throughout the timepiece, if we're to draw it out over the long term, I was able to recognise and understand those bits and pieces that were taking place throughout my career, but also in the following years to come. That the go in and thrash yourself sort of set up wasn't really a great example to set for myself or for others, because it just ended up being a full-on catastrophe. And yeah, interestingly enough, if I'm to look at it now, it's a clear differentiation between, an outcome-based mindset versus a process-driven, purpose-orientated mindset, which fortunately I'm now able to take full advantage of, well, optimistically so. But yeah, I suppose it all comes through about timing, patience.
Can you just share? So, our listeners are kind of varied and all over, from kind of sport, leadership, coaching backgrounds. Can you just expand on the difference between the outcome and that process-based mindset, just for those people that maybe are unfamiliar?
Yeah, definitely. So say, for example, you've got a bunch of kids and they're playing basketball, and they love what they're doing. They're so associated with all the interaction and the games, and the joy that they're receiving from their own performance, and looking forward to the victory that they'll get, or how many points they'll be able to shoot in the game. And all of that energy is directed into, the outcome itself. Whereas if we're to look at what purpose that's serving, it's more of an internal sensation that people can get. So you put the same kids on the court and you think about, what does that connection mean to your friends? Does it make, Jimmy and Jessica feel good that you've rocked up to training today? Will it make them want to come back the next time? So the difference in the purpose of what you're doing versus the outcomes is really significant, because when it gets to the big time, often enough with huge victories like Olympics, Tour de France, the Giro d'Italia, etc. If your purpose and your identity is separate from just what you do, it really turns into I suppose, a deeper connection with yourself, and often enough with the environment around you, as opposed to, I've got the gold medal or the trophy, and all the aesthetic things that come with that. So yeah, it's quite challenging to put that across to, really young people, because they see the flashing lights and the things that are really cool, but it avoids the process and integral steps that are required to get to that point, and the satisfaction overall that one can get from acknowledging and sticking to, the diligence of what you're going to reward yourself in the end.
So just kind of playing that back a little. So is there because we've had quite a few guests that have said something very similar, where when you're very outcome focused, and your outcome might be to be world champion, in cycling, win the Tour de France, win a gold medal, but very limited people will ever do that. So actually, then, if you're very outcome, this is my assumption of what you're saying. So please correct me if there's a, and we had an ex MMA fighter on now into a coach and leadership. And one of the things he was saying, and we've had a few UFC fighters have come on and said, look, they wanted to be champion. That was their outcome, but they didn't achieve it. So the part of them was, dissatisfied with who they were as a person, with their career and everything else. Whereas actually when we look at them from an outsider, they've achieved some phenomenal things, but only in hindsight have they gone back and went, what we forget or failed to do was just enjoy the process of getting there. Enjoy that. Actually, we love this. The reason why we got into this is because we enjoy combat sports. We enjoy the competitive edge. We enjoy getting in there and pushing ourselves and challenge ourselves. And part of that process is doing that every single day. Is that what have I understood that correctly?
Yeah, definitely. It's about the connectedness that you feel within yourself. And I suppose a certain amount of, self-gratitude that you receive through accomplishing smaller, medium, large size things. So yeah, definitely. Ferraris don't turn around and give you a hug after you've done really well. But,
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
It's just one of those things, I guess.
But I think it's a really important topic because, I guess in the world that I sit myself now as an executive coach, mainly working with founder-based business owners, they set these big goals of what they want their business to do at the start. And then along the way, they get these moments where when they're not achieve or not where they are, where they want to be, that they do, that becomes disheartened, that becomes disillusioned, becomes putting themselves in. Am I not good enough? Self-belief goes, all of those things that, where again, if you were to maybe, and when you play it back, saying if you were to start your business and if you were to start your business today and you were to say you were going to be turning over this amount of money in this amount of time, would you be happy? Well, yeah, but I'd set my goal at this. Okay, so it's so if you were to roll back, what you've achieved is an amazing achievement. But because you're always, like you've said, looking at the outcome and the outcome focus, and they haven't achieved the outcome, actually, when they're looking at it, they're looking through a very negative lens that actually makes them suboptimal. Whereas, if we can get in that the whole point of we go into business is to enjoy the freedom of working for ourselves or the ability to make our own decisions or take things in the direction we want to do without being told, so that is the process, isn't it, that we're trying to kind of say. So there's so much similarities from what you're saying that I think also that we can take into a business as well.
Yeah, definitely. The I suppose the major thing with sports um, and I'm definitely going to say with business is the perception that we formulate from the outset is often enough attached to the objectives that we foresee or imagine, but that neglects the the sort of work that's required to get there. And that work in itself, as you said, provides the inner sense of satisfaction, the real reward. And that's the thing that that we're able to look back on and say, yeah, that's where I was at that point in time, and that's what I achieved, and that's where the quality is, regardless of how huge the outcome was at all.
Mm. And is that a reflection, in hindsight, reflection of you as an athlete? Were you quite an outcome focused person and not process driven, or and, and if when was there a shift?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think from the very, very outset, I had uh, this this set of objectives, two of which formulated perfect for me. Winning the national championship was a huge priority, and I say priority because it really had nothing to do with all the other elements. For example, just making it to turn professional in itself, which is quite a massive thing to do. But that was not in my vision. It was just the one-day race in Australia to gain the victory, which would supersede everything. And secondary to that, when I eventually went into the world tour, I think it would have been in the first couple of months, I'd set this objective one day looking at other guys performing at the Tour of Italy, and I said, I'd really love to win the climbers jersey at that race. Probably because I was living in Italy at that point in time. It's a magical race in itself. That was on my mind, and I'd let the directors know, and they said, okay, well, if you want to do that, then that's your race. And that's where it's going to be. And interestingly enough, a couple of years later, that was me on that spot. And I think through our discussion the other day, I was telling you about how I'd formulated training plans on track lists to music to work out my cadence and the distance and the climbs, every micro factor imaginable, just for a 3-week period in May 2010, while neglecting life itself on the exterior. There was no existence. It was all about that race, and that's what took place. Which, was purely outcome focused. I think, as I'd also mentioned, upon the completion of that race, I sort of sat there and thought to myself, is that it? Is that everything? And it just wasn't. So it was a massive contrast to what I'd imagined or perceived it to be. And I think that really brought it home at that point in time.
Is there and I think that from the conversations I've had, I think you're not alone in that, isn't it? You set your goal on this, and when you've achieved it, actually that feeling isn't what you assumed it would be, which is kind of the vibe I'm getting, which then kind of leaves you with a bit of a, oof, okay. I guess the question that, and I'm going to ask it because the listeners can't ask it, do you think there's a world where if you weren't so focused everything around your world for those 3 months that you would have won that?
It's a challenging question. And it really peers deep into the characteristics of the attributes of a certain person's mental capabilities, physiological side of things too. Because often enough in sports we find ourselves, in awe of these high performers who've got a certain amount of possibility that's open to them purely because of their physiological advantages for their particular sports. And I think at the top level, there's a certain bracket of individuals who are capable of holding themselves within that zone or framework. And it's very challenging because to imagine, particularly for myself, in a place where I could live a completely normal life or existence without that top end performance. I think it'd be really, really challenging.
Okay. And again, it was coming from a place of curiosity, is because obviously you were able to, I think the life lesson I'm taking from this or I'm hearing and I'm interpreting is, you can spend your whole life just focusing on one thing to the sacrifice of you sacrifice everything else in your life to focus on a 3-week race to win a stage where you think, okay, that's the goal, I've achieved that goal. But actually, I also get the vibe, but for what? Because actually what I thought I'd get from that, I didn't get. So I don't know if I've assumed that correctly, and so there's almost the question of, okay, it's great that you've done it and you've got that title, which no one will ever take away from you, but what did it actually bring better to your life?
Yeah, I think there's probably, for me at least, there was almost a flip side to that coin as well, which has always interested me, just as much so as the performance orientated mindset too. And it's that during the time I was racing as a professional, I'd always been hyper aware of the world itself in the external. I wasn't engaging with it probably as much as I would have normally, of course, but it was always taking away the attention from the severity or the hard nature that the professional sport it was in itself. Which could be said now as, my own justification for not continuing on a high level of performance or whatever. But I know for myself, and particularly those close to me, that I probably wasn't capable of performing at the level throughout my career purely because I didn't attach enough psychological, people would call it determination, into establishing a process
Okay.
with enough, rigidity or intensity as it was deserved.
Okay.
So it's a really dynamic interface to play with now, and maybe a lot of that's considering it's only natural to feel as if you sold yourself short after you finished any career, I think.
Yeah. And but from the conversations I've certainly had, that's certainly I think a lot of, especially high performing athletes, because the career is always short, isn't it? Relatively. Um, we had a fellow Australian, Matthew Innings, on, and he was saying that, he played, first class cricket for Australia, but never managed to play for actual Australia just because of where he was, and there were people better than him, and he saw that as a bit of a failure during his career. But you know, and now he's gone into performance, and he's working with athletes and helping them kind of realize that, unfortunately, not everybody is going to always get the highs. And what do you do after that career? Because they are short. So I think a lot of athletes do seem to feel that, don't they? I've never been skilled enough to say I was a higher level athlete of anything, so I certainly can't embrace that feeling. Um, but there's certainly, for the conversations I've experienced, that is quite common after a high level athletic career. Mm.
Yeah, definitely. It's it's quite a seldom occurrence that you'll get really deep with someone who's been um, performing at the highest level, who can't think of moments or certain amounts of time in which they felt 100%, either engaged or fulfilled in what they did. There's always something else,
Mm.
um, and
Yeah.
the interesting thing too is, as you said, if it takes for someone to be at that level, never to represent the country, um, that's got to be a really, really, challenging thing just to conceptualize. But it doesn't dismiss the effort and the passion that's involved with it.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, that sort of thing's forgotten. So, yeah, it's it's an interesting one.
Yeah, it definitely is. But after your career, there was a different chapter, wasn't
It was.
there? Should we move on to 2014 then?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
So you were living in Italy, you've moved to the States. So just for listeners, just to bring them up to your story, and I know we touched on it in the intro. So what then happened in that part of your life?
Yeah, I'd moved um, to just outside of Denver, and uh, yeah, the Rocky Mountains in Colorado are a really magical place to be living, um, and I'd gone there in preparation for um, the tour of Utah and then the tour of Colorado, uh, racing for a team named Jelly Belly. Not too sure if you're familiar with the confectionery, but it was a tasty trip. Anyway, um, what had happened was, in the second day of the tour of Utah, I'd gotten really sick with pneumonia, and didn't really know how that had happened. I could only assume that it was the probably 2 months of altitude training in Evergreen, at about 2,500 meters altitude. I was living, remorselessly preparing myself to do these 2 races. And was rushed to hospital and woke up the next day, and they said, "Oh, look, you've turned septic and you've got a number of these infections, so we'll just hit you up with all the antibiotics." And I interestingly thought to myself, "Oh, this would be a great opportunity to get a few days rest, fly back to to Denver, and then get ready for the tour of Colorado." So after 2 days, booked my flight, which was an early morning flight the next day, and was discharged from the hospital, made my way to the hotel, relatively close to the airport. And by the time I'd got there, the restaurant at the hotel was closed. I asked the receptionist, "Is there any food available?" And they said, "No, our place is closed, but there's a few restaurants just across the intersection and down the road." So I thought, "Oh, cool." I stepped out of the hotel, made a left, and what I presume to be crossed the road. Woke up 6-7 days later, with people dressed in lab coats peering over me, and I sort of thought to myself, this wasn't the hotel room I was booked into, was it? And discovered shortly afterwards that I'd been hit by someone who'd driven off into the night. So amid that confusion, I was one sort of, in an immediate sense, questioning that, can I walk? Can people understand what I'm trying to say? All those sorts of things that you'd be, freaking out about. But after my family had flown over from Australia, and they were able to, recognise and understand what had taken place, then started the journey of, the physiological rehabilitation, which took about 6 to 8 weeks, still in Utah at a facility there, where they retaught me how to, function. And as is with the case, a lot of the time when you're in that sort of environment, part of the rehabilitation process is movement. And they've done all the brain scans and recognised the damage that had occurred. So it was sort of a mix between, making sure that I was able to articulate my sentence structure as a normal person would, and also the physical side of things too. And unfortunately, a part of that involved massive amounts of medication.
Okay.
And as you can imagine, over the months, accumulating numerous operations and whatnot, I formulated a huge dependence on these drugs, and yeah, I suppose it's one of those things where you can reconcile the fact of what had happened, and justify the behaviours of taking the substance to mitigate the angst or the discomfort that you're in. But that was coupled with the sense of I don't really know who I am anymore. I'd lost the purpose of what I had been doing up until that point in my life, and just substituted it with, the day-to-day bunch of survival mechanisms, which, yeah, which didn't really end up functioning that well. So, yeah, as you said in the intro, that sort of lasted for 10 to 12 years.
Wow. I mean, there's a pause for me because I think just not that I don't think I ever could imagine what that's like or understand what it was like. But there's a part of you that just goes, oh wow. How much do you feel comfortable sharing about what that 10 years was like? Because there's a lot in that, isn't there? There's obviously, like you've said, you've openly said around some dependency. And then you also talked around the loss of identity. And each one of those are very big things in most people's lives, but combined together. Can you give us, you don't have to go as deep as you feel like you want to go, but I guess it's, what was that, what was that like, and examples for people out there that maybe, because people listening to this are, that's the great thing with these conversations is there might be people listening to this that have got a dependency or have got a loss of identity, and actually your story will be resonating with them. This is the great, this is why I appreciate you sharing your story because, we don't know whoever listens to this, and that's the bit of the lovely part of me and the bit I enjoy having these conversations because people listening, you never know who's going to land with what. So I guess it'd just be curious again from a place of curiosity and share what you feel comfortable sharing. But what was that kind of that period of your life like? And then how did you then obviously I want to say the word to take control, but I don't know if that lands well. But again, how did you, you know, get from where that journey into this next chapter?
Yeah, I guess um, there's certain sort of phases that you that I went through. Um, One of which was the initial denial of what had happened in the incident itself, um, and to be so dismissive of that was, really, really self-neglectful because I wasn't paying attention um, to the correct recovery process, um, which would have provided the self-discovery necessary to re-establish who I was as a person. But what I did, in fact, was avoid the self-confrontation
Okay.
in and of itself, to say, look, this is potentially going to be the most life-changing experience, if any, that you're going to have. Because at that point in time, I turned it into, as I said before, just a whole bunch or ball of defense mechanisms, to basically mitigate any harm or perceived, catastrophic outcomes. The flip side to that, of course, is that, the further down the rabbit hole you go, the harder it is to get out. And that would mean not getting in touch with people who would have been massively helpful, not connecting to people who often enough are there to provide the best support and care, and gradually falling into a hole, which I experienced in a way that was so self-destructive, and it was all under the guise of, maybe no one can understand, given what I had been previously and now nothing. And no one walks into the street and gets hit by cars. It doesn't happen, so people just won't be able to comprehend. And all those factors just led to more denial, and that complete disconnection, from what was in fact reality, led to I think I said the other day, a really good set of examples on how not to live your life. So, and then I suppose in the second phase was attempts that I'd formulated in order to re-establish myself, and they were really misdirected. Trying to do things with my time, getting certifications, as a personal trainer, and helping people out, which others could see as someone doing the best that they could at that point in time. But they too were just things that I was doing, to avoid putting into context what had actually taken place. So they just provide avenues for me to be doing things that weren't really meaningful to me. And then I think after about the 8th year or so, I'd put myself through such a ring of incidents and sort of re-traumatizing myself too. Not in a psychological way of remembering the incident, because I couldn't, but reflecting back on elements of my career that I couldn't relive again, which caused continual rumination about things that I couldn't change, because the past couldn't have happened any other way, because it didn't, and I was just trying to fix holes that I couldn't mend. So I think it was probably the third time I'd been woken up from uh, overdosing on medication at a friend's place. I woke up again, hospitalised, being told the stories about how someone had found me and how it sort of ruined their life. It was enough damage to me that made me think, no, this is the point in time in which I need to change. And that sort of brought me to the third phase, which was having the support and accepting the goodwill of those I was associated with and my family and close friends to say, now would be a really good time to go into full-time rehabilitation for as long as it takes in order to really recognise and understand who I was, what my purpose in life is, and to reset everything. And I think through taking that step, it was what I really needed. And sort of finds myself now, nearly 3 years on, able to really appreciate that took place, and how fortunate I am being able to speak to it, which is it's important, you know.
Yeah, listen, I really appreciate you sharing that. I could really feel you kind of a lot of the emotion through, even though you're halfway around the world and we're via Zoom. I guess then where's that, what have you learned? Is there any lessons that you've taken from that experience? You say there over the last 3 years, you kind of now and I want to also move into what you do now because you're moving into helping support others now. So it's, there is a happy ending, isn't there, to this next chapter. But I guess, is there any lessons about that? Because, you broke it down really, really articulately, the three phases you went through. And, I guess for anyone listening now that it might not be them, it might be somebody they know that they're aware of, that they're in some kind of struggle. Um, what could you what can you take from your kind of experiences that you think would be helpful for others maybe listening?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the most fundamental things that I was able to pick up, while in I guess you'd call it the sanctuary of rehabilitation, away from the world completely, was that it's going to be okay. And I know that gets said around the place continually, but I was only able to really recognize the power of that when I'd actually been killed temporarily. But waking up from that experience and then magnified countless other times being woken up again in the hospital environment. It only comes about through honesty with yourself. And it's about accepting that reality before trying to change it. Often enough, the gravity of what we're experiencing or perceiving isn't really reflective of what's actually happening. And it's through the experiences of, the challenge that we're faced with that brings us to the present. So, yeah, often enough when speaking to people about how bad it is that I've wound up here, or, I'm not putting out this significant data that is in any way reflective of who I am. It's like, well, if you're in a position to be here right now and we're talking about it, then whatever you've overcome has been achieved, which is pretty awesome. So it's just about, I guess, reminding people of their capacity in any instance to provide the resilience to themselves, which, sort of supersedes everything.
No, I love that. Which kind of does bring us to what you've done with these 3 years, though. So you've retrained.
Yeah.
So do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, for sure. What I found was that in speaking about the pure elements of what it feels like to be completely fulfilled in an athletic sense and, rich with life and experiences and whatnot, for that to be taken away is a really, really similar occurrence for people in high-performing sport, high-performing business, and a lot of elements of day-to-day life, because it juxtaposes what we're used to and then what isn't there anymore. So what I'd found was that after I'd been able to speak about my journey more openly and getting a bit more availability of myself, the amount of people who wanted to reach out and share, how they felt so alone and almost useless in a way, was quite a frequent occurrence. So what was most important for me was to reintroduce the skills that I was able to pick up along my way in professional sport at the highest level to then use in basically what I try to do now. And that's encourage people to increase their awareness and utilize all those little things which they probably took for granted during their time at the top level in different positions, and re-engage, because it's really important to feel as if you know, you're useful, because everyone is at the end of the day. You know, there's so many, you know, different strategies and ways that we can break down finding your purpose, but it's a part of the adventure that we're all on, which basically gives us the purpose on a platter. And it's just that reaching out and reconnecting with people, which often enough provides the ways in which we can facilitate that unfolding.
Do you think that is some of the strength of the work you're doing now, is almost, you know, there's a lot resonating for me just in that way you were saying about how, you know, people don't even stop to think about, you know, what they've achieved or what the purpose is, or they're just sometimes just going along with the grind, don't they? So, you know, bringing it back to that self-awareness can be really, really powerful, can't it?
Yeah, it's huge to, you know, appreciate the magnitude of what we've been through in anyone's life. Is massively empowering, because we can find so much utility and strength from, you know, what we've been able to overcome, whether that be, you know, in sports or business, in anything. If we really sit back and appreciate the most simple of things, it makes the rest of it unfold a whole lot easier.
Yeah, and it's interesting. There's a few things that come from that. I love the fact that, you know, this adventure we're all on, and I think it's a nice reframe of life, isn't it? If you see it as an adventure, okay, what's, you know, it makes you you know, I smiled at that thinking, okay, and it certainly made me think, okay, that's exciting actually, because it feels exciting, doesn't it? Oh, what's next around the corner, or you know, maybe without worrying about the outcome, but the process. But if it is an adventure, you know, let's just hope that let's open it up to the world to hope that the next adventure is going to be exciting. Yeah, I really like that. And you've retrained, so is it psychotherapy
Yeah,
you're in?
for the time being, I think by the end of this year, I'll have my qualifications um, in psychotherapy, or what I'd sort of prefer to call general counselling,
Okay.
and also addictive behaviour therapy,
Okay.
which is, it's one of those things where if you're in the environment where you're so frequently bombarded with information about treatment modalities and whatever, a lot of it becomes second nature. But what I'd found through these two disciplines, with the experience of what I'd had previously, is my ability to really listen to people. Because if I'm to sit across from anyone and provide them with, you know, so much information that they're not capable of downloading or absorbing themselves, it's going to neglect their story and what they have to provide for themselves, essentially, to get the most out of what they really want. So yeah, optimistically, I think by the end of this year, I'll be able to really start, at least from at least from a public perspective, be able to engage with people in a really productive way. What I don't want to do is walk into the scene, acting as if I've got all this credibility, when in fact I'd prefer to just come in as myself in a position where I'm prepared to listen to anyone's story and find for them the best opportunities that they can get for themselves out of themselves.
Yeah, I really love that. Really love that. I guess being a little bit conscious of time, I guess if I could just start bringing it together, thinking about what you've learned about yourself through the many chapters of your adventure, what would we, if we think about what you've learned about yourself and then what you're now doing, helping support others, is there anything that we've not really talked around optimizing ourselves or optimizing others that you think is important to share before we kind of move into some deep advice stuff?
Yeah, I suppose from a personal perspective, when it comes to the optimization piece, it's pretty much, for me at least, identifying with the information that really is relevant to you, because it's also easy to get bombarded by so many different formulas and different contexts or ways in which to do things, which is all great, but it's all just information.
Mm-hmm.
And very dismissive of what it actually is to act out these things in real life. So I suppose you could say that's just really getting to know yourself as a person is fundamentally, at least for me, key to optimizing your own game.
I couldn't. I don't think I can agree more. And I think the other thing for me, what I heard from you earlier was, and then supporting others. It's taking that time to listen, so people understand. Helping others to maybe understand themselves, and then what they can be doing to support themselves as well, isn't it? I think that's what I've certainly picked up from this conversation. So if we just delve into a little bit of advice, or kind of sum it up rather than advice of kind of just maybe some things that people could consider. So we'll ask a question: what are 3 practical things that people could try today?
Yeah, I think probably one for me essentially is when you get the chance to reflect, whether it's a daily practice or even weekly, identify the behaviours that you can see yourself repeating that'll actually work or have worked. And normally they're a really good indicator of what's actually going to function for you.
Okay.
And also a really good example of what not to do.
Okay.
Which Sounds remarkably simple, but often enough they're things that we just go amiss, like that didn't count, or oh, that was really cool, and then the next time you do it, it's just by fortune. But it's not, because if it's effective, normally it's going to be functional and it works. So that's important. Secondly, I'd say allowing yourself to, giving yourself permission to get curious and ask questions about why I'm thinking a particular way. Because often enough our perception leads us to believe things that are just stupid. We've got our cortex so well figured out that we can tell ourselves all kind of magical things, but in fact a lot of it is bullshit. So we need to ascertain what's effective, what's not, and I suppose thirdly would be get some intentionality, which works into the whole purpose deal. If you find what you are actually intentional about doing, another one of those things that sounds quite blasé or whatever, but as a gut instinct, forget about what the brain can analyse and provide data for and all that sort of jazz. If you know internally, you actually really know, which some might call just a general reality check, but it's about what's really lighting that fire for you. And often enough, that's going to suggest, where the true intention is. So giving yourself this sort of time to just, sit back and reflect on where that sits for you is important.
I completely agree, and I think it all does start. There's a prerequisite of giving you almost give yourself permission to time to reflect sometimes as well, isn't there?
Definitely.
We live in these lives of busyness, and where busyness is often seen as a badge of honor, and it can be seen as a badge of honor to be, oh yeah, I'm really busy.
Yeah.
Sometimes just giving yourself permission to have that time to sit, reflect, and ask yourselves those good questions. Now, I really love them. When I was listening to them, and where I see the power in what you've just said is we do loads of things unconsciously, don't we? And we have these habits unconsciously. By actually taking the time, like you've said, to kind of become aware, to bring them into our conscious awareness and analyze sometimes, oh, actually, this is a helpful trait, let's keep this, or what on earth am I doing this for? Maybe or, being curious about why you are doing certain things by bringing them into the conscious. No, really powerful, and agree with all of them. I think they're really lovely. So what's one principle you wish every leader understood?
Um, I suppose it's really, really difficult for people in leadership, particularly, as you said before, these days when we're continually bombarded by information. So it's quite possible for, whether it's employees or, team members that you're, in a leadership position of, to be, influenced by different forms of information. So I guess it's just important to really stick with the process. Which is one of those things that it gets mega thrashed, in most sports these days, and just in the whole global sphere. It's just that word process. But I've found within myself that it's only throughout that process that you're able to find the ways in which to actually modulate or change what's required.
Mm.
And that's where the gold is. So as as mundane or monotonous as it might appear to,
Yeah, but if we put a sexy title on it, create passion for the process or something, then it'll isn't
we
it?
can jazz it up.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But everything you're saying, I think, is really strong, and I think it is, and that's a lot of people are looking for you've just said that actually the gold is in that. The gold sometimes, we've already, and most people listening to this are already doing that. They're just not searching for the gold in that. They're searching for the gold in something different, you know. So,
Definitely.
so I think it's really good. Just before we wrap it up, is there anything we've not covered that you feel that you'd like to share? You can obviously say no. Don't worry.
Um, Maybe just on a last point, um, which for me counts across the globe for everyone, is not to rely on motivation alone.
Okay.
It's a really good way to isolate yourself. Um, Identify and recognize the behaviors that are going to make life easier, because it's through doing that that we're going to be happy in ourselves and reflect that to other people, and that gets reciprocated. So it just becomes a more user-friendly environment for everyone, I guess.
No, I love that. I love that too. So the people who are listening and want to follow you and know more about you, where do you hang out? Where can they follow you?
Um, I'm actually yet to release this website, and part of that is because I don't want to. I'm reluctant to, you know, attempt saturating the environment with too much information. So I'm trying to trim it down and keep it
Okay.
as simplistic as possible.
Yeah.
Um, but when I do so, I'll be able to reach out to you and
Yeah, share it. Let
everyone.
me know and we can add it onto the pod. That's fine.
Um, Otherwise, yeah, I think on Facebook it's just Matty Lloyd. There should be a picture of a cyclist on there,
I'll add all
or
the links in with everything that you want them to have. Yeah, don't worry.
yeah. But I'll be able to fill people in on what it is that I'll be doing, and
Yeah,
of
that's
course, if anyone wants to reach out to me, I'm more than comfortable to speak to people, particularly
cool.
about issues that they're facing, um, and ways in which they can find the best you know the best ways through it. Um, and often enough, that's the first step, is just reaching out, having someone to listen and to recognize what it is that they're going through. So that's always important.
No, I agree, and that's an amazing thing. What you working on next? Sounds like the website.
um, yeah. as I said, it'll be relatively simplistic, and once I've been able to accrue enough, I suppose, practical work that's obviously documented and taken care of the psychotherapy side of things, I'll be able to get amongst it um, in a recognised or registered fashion, which will be productive, hopefully.
Yeah, no, definitely so. I think you're going to be awesome. I generally do. I think you are awesome already. I think on what you're going to go on to create and what you are looking to do, I think will be very helpful in the world. Very, very helpful in the world. Is there one final challenge you'd like to set our audience and our guests and our listeners?
One final challenge. This is actually the best one of all. It sounds ridiculous, but to sit with yourself. No objective, no music, no soundtrack, no mantra, whatever. Just sit there. Even at the point where you don't have to time it. Acknowledge that space. And from what you get inside is often enough to get you through, the next day, the next half hour, whatever it might be. But acknowledging the self is crucial.
Beautiful. Matty, thanks ever so much. I've really enjoyed it. To all of our
Thanks for having me
listeners.
on board, Andy.
Oh, mate, honestly, this is I've been so looking forward to this. I'm really, really looking forward to getting it out. And for our listeners, make sure you are following. When you will follow this, the episodes will come straight into you. So you do any questions, queries, or anything, feel free to reach out. Any feedback, feel free to reach out. For now, Matty, listen, thank you ever so much. It's been a privilege to have you on. It's been a privilege to listen to your story and your honesty. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you.